Op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com. My daily take is titled, "Is America Blind to Trump's Genocide?" Now, those of you who have been longtime listeners to this program know that I was ranting about this a year ago. And I began ranting about this back in the middle of 2020. And to the best of my knowledge, I'm the only person who's pointing this out. Now, I'm not saying that to brag. I mean, I think that's actually a bad sign. Maybe my opinion really is a fringe opinion. Maybe I'm seeing patterns here where none exist. The media certainly doesn't seem to think that there's a pattern here, or if they do, they're not talking about it. But let me just lay it out for you, and you can let me know if you think I'm nuts here, or if there's something to this story. Just looking at the chronology of the coronavirus pandemic. First of all, in January, we started hearing about this. I mean, there were some inklings. You know, the federal government learned about it in November of 2019, thus COVID-19. But we really didn't hear much about it in the United States until January of 2020, when a couple of people in Seattle were infected. And, you know, it was just a couple of cases. And you know, Donald Trump had a private meeting with Bob Woodward. And he said, as he knew by that point in time, this was a killer virus. He said it, quote, rips you apart. But he also said he was going to downplay it because he didn't want to cause a panic. So on January 30th, the World Health Organization declared that the COVID outbreak was, quote, a public health emergency of international concern. The day after that, Louise and I went on a cruise with two of my brothers and about half a dozen or a dozen of their kids, a bunch of their kids, and our kids, a couple of our kids too. In fact, I think all three of our kids. And, you know, it's just a family vacation, and cruises are a cheap way to do a family vacation when you got people coming from all over the country with all different, you know, perspectives on what a vacation should be. And we got off that ship on February 8th, or we flew home on February 8th, and Louise and I were both sick. And in fact, most of the people in our family were. In fact, probably 2/3 of the people on that cruise ship were. We don't know if it was COVID. I'm inclined to think it was RSV. But at the same time, that week that we got off, another ship, the Diamond Princess, was parked outside, I forget which harbor it was in Japan. But it was quarantined off the coast of Japan for a full 2 weeks. People had to, you know, were locked down. That was February. So February, we started seeing cases increase in the United States. By March 5th, there were 129 known cases in the United States and 11 deaths, which is pretty amazing, about a 10% death rate. Just 33 days later, from March 5th, on April 6th, we would hit 10,000 Americans dead of COVID. That's how rapidly it burned through America in March. Remember that? I mean, that was when Trump came out and said, okay, we're going to shut the country down. He made that order on March 11th and said, and we were all terrified, right? All of us. I mean, fear just ripped through our communities. It was stalking our homes. We were washing our groceries with bleach after picking them up from a store parking lot, from store workers wearing masks, goggles, gloves, in some cases spacesuits. We bought up all the air filters in the country. We worked from home when we could. I did my show from home for over a year. We isolated ourselves from other people. And within those few weeks in March and early April, there were these huge COVID outbreaks, mostly all of them in blue states: Connecticut, New Jersey, New York, and Washington State. Now, Trump, 2 years earlier, had shut down both of the federal pandemic task force, one in the Department of Defense and one in the White House, that Obama had put into place as a result of the whole Ebola outbreak. Trump shut them down, so he had nothing. So he turned to Mike Pence and Jared Kushner and said, do something about this. And they actually started doing something. This was in early March. By March 7th, the U.S. deaths had risen from 4 to only 22, but that was enough to create federal action. Trump was putting doctors on TV every day. The media was freaked out as refrigerated trucks were starting to hold bodies in the New York hospitals. Doctors and nurses were our new heroes. The skies and the highways fell silent. The Dow collapsed. Millions of Americans were laid off. Over 10 million people were unemployed just in that 1 month. But saving lives was the #1 consideration, right? Throughout the whole month of March. We even had, Jared Kushner put together this little group of preppy 30-somethings that he knew from college to look for companies affiliated with Republican members of Congress who could supply PPE to hospitals. He had the post office ready to distribute 650 million masks to every American household. But then came April 7th. And keep that date in your mind, because that was the date everything changed. That was the date the New York Times ran a front page story with a huge headline: Black Americans face alarming rates of coronavirus infections in some states. Similar stories on April 7th ran in the Washington Post, on CBS, ABC, NBC, MSNBC, Fox, and CNN. And the entire Republican Party and the Trump White House and all of the conservative media on April 7th did a collective, what? Really? It was like a lightning bolt burned through the right wing. Rush Limbaugh, that afternoon, said, with the coronavirus, I've been waiting for the racial component. The coronavirus hits African Americans harder than illegal aliens, harder than women. It hits African Americans harder than anybody. Disproportionate representation. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out why black people die at higher rates of pretty much everything in the United States as a result of 400 years of institutional racism, leaving the black community with less access to health care and less access to resources, and more likely to be frontline low-paid workers who are the, quote, essential workers who had to show up. But that story, on that day, on April 7th, then the next day, Tucker Carlson goes, within a day or two, the same day, that day, Tucker Carlson says, we can begin to consider how to improve the lives of the rest, the countless Americans who have been grievously hurt by this, by our response to this. How do we get 17 million of our most vulnerable citizens back to work? That's our task. Those vulnerable citizens, of course, he was talking about, are disproportionately minorities, in my humble opinion. The House Select Committee, by the way, just last week issued a report on this, pointing out that it was overwhelmingly black and Latina women who were getting infected and dying from COVID during that period of time. They said the Latina women make up 22% of grocery store workers, black women make up 27% of women home health aides. Salaried workers, white people overwhelmingly, were telecommuting. But Trump wanted the essential workers back into the workplace. And he issued by April 7th, 12,677 Americans were dead. And on April 12th, Trump retweeted a call to fire Dr. Fauci. Now he was full in, hey, open the country back up again mode, because he believed it was mostly killing black people. Now, if that isn't the definition of genocide, I need a new dictionary. On April 13th, but keep in mind, this all started April 7th. April 13th, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce publishes a policy paper implementing a national return to work plan. FreedomWorks, the next day, publishes an op-ed about economic recovery and shielding businesses from lawsuits. 3 days later, FreedomWorks and the House Freedom Caucus issue a joint statement saying it's time to reopen the economy. And then it goes on from there. The Trump administration scrapped the plan to send masks. They stopped telling us to wear them. In fact, Trump started ridiculing them. And now we know from multiple good scientific studies that 400,000 Americans died who wouldn't have died if Trump had simply said, wear a mask and socially distance during that year of 2020.